All right, to our viewing audience, welcome. We are now live. And I'm Kat Dodds. I'm the impact producer for the new corporation. With me here are the directors, Joel Bakken and Jennifer Abbott. And before we start, I just want to acknowledge that we know people are watching us from literally all around the world, but those of us on this panel right now are on the stolen and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation. So I just want to acknowledge that's where we are at, where we are here, what is also known as Vancouver, Canada. So without further ado, I'll just let you know how things are going to proceed. We're here live streaming for an hour. We know that almost 150 of you have already been logged in to watch the film on the live stream for that, which is amazing. Not the stream, live stream, but the stream. We have had almost 550 people register for this day's event, the World Social Forum, and we're so excited about that. And behind the scenes, we have David and Darcy running tech, and Kate and Jordan, our interns, are sort of looking in the chats where we're live streaming to see some of your questions. So what I'd like to do to start us off is just invite Jen and Joel to say a few words about the film and your impressions on how you feel about, I know you're very eager to be at the World Social Forum. So here we are in this virtual context. Tell us about that. I'm going to start with Jen.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for anyone who did view our film, taking the time to do so. And it was really interesting last night when I was thinking about this event. I actually felt a little bit angry, to tell you the truth, because I knew that many of the viewers would be, obviously the World Social Forum is where the world's elite gather. And many would be the 1%, the top 1%, top 0.01%, top 5%, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just such an urgent moment in time, and we were at the edge of this precipice, going off many different kinds of cliffs. Either vast inequality, outsized power of big tech, climate catastrophe. And I'm going to just call it out. I really do hold the world's elite to a large part accountable. And I am looking forward to this discussion and hoping to engage with you around the system, which is rigged in your favor, and the fact that we don't actually have a meritocracy. And let's just shatter that illusion that those who are at the top are there because they deserve to be there. This world is just so full of injustice, and I'd really like to have a deep conversation about how we can get to change the system, and also truly address injustice, inequality, and the trajectory we're currently on towards a 4-degree rise in temperature and an unlivable planet. So I'm just going to put my cards right on the table there, and that's how I'm feeling today.
Just wanted to interject a bit. We're the World Social Forum, which is the contra to Davos, which is why we're happening now. But
I am so sorry. I was obviously not briefed. I was so not briefed, and I have to apologize. Well, actually, it's good then, because this is better. I'll be in a much better mood, and I do apologize. And I'm sorry. I was not properly briefed, and I do apologize.
Well, hopefully we'll have recorded the intro when we get invited to the World Economic Forum. When you see the film, if you haven't already, and for those of you who have, you'll see that the World Economic Forum figures quite prominently, and I think that Jen's comments are totally appropriate to it and to how we treat it as really the kind of manner, the font of the the togetherness of the top 0.01% and how they consolidate their power. But I just wanted to thank all of you on behalf of myself, and I know that Jen agrees with us, for all the work that you're doing to challenge that. And more importantly, even though the World Economic Forum plays a role in our film, and the World Social Forum is not in our film, the World Social Forum is absolutely crucial to this film getting off the ground. I was in Montreal in 2016 for the World Social Forum meeting there, and I brought with me a camera. I brought with me my then 18-year-old son who operated the camera. And we basically, the World Social Forum was incredibly welcoming. We got press credentials, and a lot of the people who are in the film, either the activists especially, I either met at the World Social Forum, or people at the World Social Forum led me to them. So it really was absolutely instrumental, this event, in getting this film off the ground. And so I want to thank the organization for that. And I want to thank all of you for your continuing struggle for a better world.
Indeed. And while we wait to find some questions, where it's been kind of an interesting process, this virtual world, and we're streaming to more than one location right now. We're on YouTube and 2 different Facebook pages, including the New Corporation Facebook page. So we have some interns out there gathering some of your questions if you're asking them in the chats, and we'll hopefully have a couple queued up. But I want to just bring the ball back over to the 2 directors and say that in the context of the film being finished and trying to get it out into the world in this time during COVID, if you could each just tell me what your hopes are for, in particular, how the audience we know is watching this now might engage with us as we start this process to get the film to everyone as a tool.
So now that I know who I'm speaking with, I will regroup and just say, yes, thank you for everybody for being here and for all the extraordinary work that you do. I think that, the release of the first film almost 2 decades ago now really showed me the power of media. I mean, it sort of shattered what I would have previously thought of as a naive assumption, which is that media actually has the power to shift consciousness. And, certainly one of the things I'm most proud about with regards to the first film is it was credited as one of the top 10 films to inspire the Occupy movement. So, I think Kat Dodds did an extraordinary job in being one of the first people to use media in collaboration with organizations and NGOs who were allies so that they could use it as a tool. And so I guess I'm hoping for this film, you'll also see opportunities to use it as a tool to advance your progressive agenda. Obviously, we cover this huge, swath of issues and really not every, many of the most urgent contemporary issues. And I am hoping that you will, once again, as 2 decades ago, use our film as a tool in solidarity with the work that you do.
Yeah, I would echo all of that, and just add that I think, a lot of people ask why make a sequel, and I think what this film, and I should add the book, which is widely available now, for which the film is based on, and is the book is easy to find, and in some jurisdictions maybe easier than the film to find. But I think what both of them do is they go beyond the first project, in that the first project really was about the institution of the corporation. It kind of worked out from there. And this film is really, and the book, are really critiques of neoliberal capitalism more generally, because what has happened over the 20 years since the first film is that we've gone from being a society that contains this corporation, this institution, to a society that's contained by it. So this time we really needed to look at corporate capitalism writ large. And I think what's so important about this book and film, and the reason I really wanted to get out there, is because what we've done is we've tried to go beyond the kind of mediascape of 5-minute YouTubes and little things here and little things there, and create a grand narrative, which is less frequent these days, but try to create a really grand narrative about neoliberal capitalism in both the sort of way that a book allows you to go into a lot of detail, and the way that a film allows you to deal with a broader sensorial palette. But I think together they really are an attempt to take on all of corporate capitalism in a very large way, and to provide tools for understanding, not only in a diagnostic sense of what is happening, but also in a prescriptive sense of how we move forward and what we need to do. And so, yeah, I really hope you can help us get this work out there, and hopefully have the impact that we spent many years making it so that we could have.
Awesome. Yeah. And I would also encourage, if you're in the YouTube chat, send us some questions. We'll be looking to see what you want to hear from Jen and Joel. And to echo what both of them have said, we're in a very different time in so many ways than when the first film came out. And one of the biggest practical issues we're facing now is how we don't have the chance to really have the film out on theaters. So we really will have both the opportunity and the challenge to really have a grassroots launch with this film. And to that end, what we could be looking for are partnerships with grassroots groups to help us get the word out, and also literally host digital community screenings across the world as we get ready to do that. We also are fundraising to do that. So those are all ways you can help us. And more to the point, though, is really reach out and join us in some fashion or other, from joining us on our website, to really help us. We wanted to organize with organizers to actually make a difference with the film. So the first thing is the film needs to be seen, and the second thing is we need to help monitor and mobilize the kind of actions that groups like those watching us today can do. I do have a question. I have to read it off my phone from William Lyons, somewhere on the internet there. Are you familiar with the community rights and rights of nature movements, and how these movements show a way to fight corporate power? Do either one of you want to take on that question? Community rights and rights of nature movements.
Well, this is very rarely does Joel and I know this one, Joel and I have a slightly different take on it. So Joel, do you want to address first, and then I'll weigh in as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in my sort of day job as a legal scholar, one of the concerns I have is about rights discourse, about its kind of inherently liberal, individuating dynamics. Now, you can play around with rights discourse, and you can broaden it out. You can create collective rights. You can create communal rights. But sometimes I worry a bit about, from my legal scholarship perspective, I worry a bit about the sort of adoption of rights to deal with issues that are really about the need for structural change, that often rights discourse can't capture, that often it sits on top of structures rather than enables you to get into challenging and changing structures. So that's a concern I have. At the same time, I recognize, my activist self recognizes, that rights discourse can be very, very powerful, and that giving rights to a river or a mountain or collective groups to deal with can be very important, especially when corporations, as collective institutions that are magically turned into individual persons, have rights to operate. Sometimes you need rights to operate back against them, but ultimately, I think there are real limits to using rights. But as I say, I'm very conflicted between the sort of analytical ideas about rights that I developed as a law scholar on the one hand, and on the other, the real rhetorical power that rights discourse can have in activist spaces.
So I would just add, because my vantage point is more as a filmmaker and a cultural worker and a media activist, that while I understand and really appreciate what Joel's saying and have learned a great deal from Joel about this issue, I'd add that I see a place for the rights of nature movement to shift consciousness so that we can start to appreciate the sentience of other other animals rather, and also the natural world that we are a part of. So I feel that the movement has a very positive potential place in terms of consciousness shifting relationships. So that's one thing that I value about it. At the same time, though, I for my other film, The Magnitude of All Things, which you can check out at themagnitudeofallthings.com. I went down to the Sapara territory in Ecuador, and Ecuador is a country that recognizes the rights of nature. And in my building of the relationship with the Sapara people there, it's just apparent that those are trumped whenever economic imperatives get in the way. So it's unfortunately hasn't been that effective currently in that country. Perhaps it will be in the future. But as I say, I see a place for it. But at the same time, I really hear what Joel's saying.
Awesome. We have some great questions pouring in. So let me start with this one, which is, I think, from one of our interns, Jordan. And she asks, despite the surge in corporate capitalism resistance shown towards the end of the film, there's a simultaneous rise in people turning their frustration with economic disempowerment on the most vulnerable populations rather than holding corporate capitalism to account. What is the most effective way forward in redirecting these people's misplaced frustration with systemic inequality back onto the corporations and systems at fault? It's a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, that is a question that in the book I address very frontally. In the film, we kind of work around it and drop some ideas about it, but I spend a lot of time in the book, and if I could sort of summarize the argument is that a lot of the reasons we have this division, that the sort of rise of right-wing movements, their political mobilization, what we've seen recently in the United States, Trump's base, all of that has to do with, and these incredible divisions, has to do with a lot of legitimate anger and frustration on the part of large segments of the population, of the working population, being completely abandoned by the system as a result of neoliberal policies of slashing corporate taxes and so on. Now, the problem, as we show in the film and the book, is that those same corporate forces have been very good at creating a narrative that basically says, government is bad for you individuals because it taxes you and it regulates you, and it's bad for us as corporations because it taxes us and regulates us. So they've created this false class solidarity between the 1% and the 99%. And I think that resonates because many among the 99% are feeling really terribly abandoned. So the short sort of solution that I propose anyways is, my argument in the book is that democracy can't exist in a democratic socialist or social democratic form, that you can't have political democracy without broad social equality. Because if you have that kind of fracture that's created by broad social inequality, there can't be any common ground, there can't be any social solidarity that enables people who, people aren't perfect, who are different, who have hateful views of one another and all of that, but at least some common ground that enables them to come together around what might be called traditional class issues, around issues of economic security, economic equality, and so forth, where there are real there are commonalities. And so I don't know how we get from here to there, but I think a large part of it is pushing for programs that try to sort of bring us towards greater, at least economic commonality. And from that may come some way that we can work together and at least take the edges off some of the hatefulness that is coming from white nationalists and that's aimed at maintaining white privilege. That's the only thing I can see. I don't think it's about the inherent badness of people. I think it's largely a response to policies that have promoted just radical and unprecedented economic inequality, a kind of class warfare on the part of the corporate sector, both to destroy social infrastructure and to create a false sense of solidarity between the corporate class and the working class. And I think we really need to put a lie to that, and that's what we try to do in part with this project.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with everything Joel has said. I'd like to add the dimension of gender and patriarchy. In terms of the rise of right-wing populism, you just have to look around in the contemporary context and see that all the strong men are mostly men, other than in France. So, and then many of the people who are following its policies and are at the sort of forefront of the violent movements in various places are also men. I don't want to essentialize gender here, but I do want to point to that. And so I think that one could also say, in terms of fighting it, as with so many issues, liberation of women would be an empowerment of women, both economically and systemically. It would probably go a long way to fighting this very troubling rise. And just to substantiate that further, I think if you look around today at the leaders of those countries that are doing best in terms of fighting the pandemic or addressing inequalities, many of them are women-led. So I really support policies that lift up women and address patriarchy and misogyny, which there's without question undercurrents of both, as well as obviously white supremacy in these movements. Very, very troubling indeed.
Awesome. And that leads to another question from Carrie Wong. Will female leadership make a difference? Maybe you could add to that.
Well, I would think, yes. I guess I sort of, in my view, answered that, because I do feel that, I don't want to essentialize gender. We obviously had Margaret Thatcher. Everybody always points to her. But I think if we look around today, I'm not the only one certainly to point to the fact, and it's an empirical fact. If you study certain metrics within societies that are currently being led by women, there's some extraordinary gains in those countries, and so let's just hope it continues.
Awesome. I think that definitely answered your question. From Toussaint, it sounds like jobs are the core issue behind corporate power and government stepping down their control on them. Jobs and wages need to be rethinked. Who wants to take that on?
Yeah, sure. It gets back to the point about we really need to have a system of social organization that sees work as part of people's lives, that doesn't alienate people from their work. And what that means is that work has to be an environment that is human, that is meaningful, that is purposeful, that workers feel they have ownership of what they're doing, that their skills are valued for being their skills. And our current system of understanding work, our kind of hyper-capitalist system, doesn't do that. It sees jobs as simply means of creating, what Marx described as surplus value, as creating the difference between what you pay the worker and what you get for the product the worker makes, which in turn is the profit that your company reaps. So that view is so absolutely inhuman and exploitative, and just diminishes the person. And so, we see these horrible examples of Amazon warehouse workers or drivers just being horribly exploited. We see the tech industry trying to evade and avoid the whole attempt at creating reciprocal obligations between workers and companies through employment law, by saying basically, oh, they're not employees, they're our partners in business. And so we see all these ways that capital tries to maintain this idea that working persons, people, are just units from which you derive surplus value. And that kind of inhumanity has to stop. We have an attempt in our current society, in public sector jobs, there is at least a glint of the idea that a job is more than simply about extracting service and extracting labor, but that you have to provide meaningfulness and all of that. There's a glimmer of that in the public sector, which is also not coincidentally where unions tend to be more prominent. But I think even that we're losing as more and more gets privatized. So we really do have to rethink not just jobs. We need more jobs, or we need better wages. Yes, that's true, but we need to rethink what a job is and rethink it in human terms.
Great. Going back to a more foundational question, which might be good for some of the people who don't know the whole history of how these films came to be. But from Kate, our intern, how did your interest in corporations come about, and how did that lead you to making these documentaries?
Well, I think when we started the first film, for myself, I'll just speak for myself, obviously. I'm not sure why, but I'm very motivated by a desire to work for justice, as I suspect many of the viewers are. And I think back in the late 1990s, when we were making the first film, or starting the first film, it sort of became apparent to all three of us, it would be Joel and then Mark Akbar, who co-directed the first film with me, that really corporations were, and the rise, like the absolute outsized power of corporations and increasing power of corporations were really to blame, as I embarrassingly stated in the beginning of this live cast when I thought we were speaking with a completely different audience. Really are to blame for the state of the world today. And I think that has only increased exponentially in the last 2 decades. So, my interest is, as a filmmaker, to really take on the most pressing social, political, and environmental issues of our day. And without question, for me, the corporation is central to that, and also the ideology that supports it, neoliberalism, and the system within which it operates, 21st century extractive capitalism. So that's where my interest comes from.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar for me. I was working in the late 1990s again, doing legal scholarship about the corporation, and because I teach commercial law as well as constitutional law, and I work in that area. And what I started to realize as we saw the sort of beginnings of, or the, I guess, neoliberalism really coming to fruition in the late 90s was, and I wasn't the only one realizing this, the whole anti-globalization movement came out of this, but there was a kind of tipping point in the late 90s where it felt like corporations were shifting from being institutions that we governed as a society to institutions that govern society. And that this had something to do with globalization, with the inability of nation states to regulate corporations anymore. And it was really when I was sitting in my office at the University of British Columbia and I was watching out my window as the APEC protest, which was really one of the first big mass anti-globalization protests happening on the campus of the University of British Columbia. And I sort of ran out with my copy of the Constitution and got myself tear gassed and everything, and was saying to the police, you know, you're violating constitutional rights. And they're like, okay, you know, we don't really care. And seeing students arrested and thrown into paddy wagons and the whole thing, it was very disturbing. But we were shooting that as well. You know, we had sort of just started, Mark and I had just started sort of thinking about this film. And from that big APEC protest, we had then a lot of the organizers of that were involved in putting together the Battle of Seattle, the WTO protest, which we also went down and shot. And so it was that realization that the corporation was really becoming a dominant or governing institution in society. In terms of the second film, it was the realization that our warning in the first film hadn't landed at all. It didn't work. It was not a success because since that first film, corporations had only become more powerful, larger, more monopolistic. Tech had sort of started to rise. And all the problems that we looked at in the first film had gotten worse. And so another shift had happened, which made me think another film and book were necessary. And that is that we had truly crossed the threshold from corporations sort of poised to become governing institutions in our global society to them actually being governing institutions in our global society. And also they're starting to wear the mantle of being publicly minded, of caring about society, and therefore being legitimately in a position of governing society. So I really saw that movement towards corporations becoming good actors, sustainable, caring about human rights, the sort of that was twinned with the idea, and therefore we can run society because we're no longer those money grubbing psychopaths that you presented in the first film. Now we are publicly conscientious institutions that can take over from failing governments. And I think some of the most chilling moments in the film are when we see spokespeople for the sort of corporate movement, like Richard Edelman in Davos saying, I'm not much a believer in political citizenship. I believe in the power of marketplaces and in corporations as good actors, which is just a full confession of saying, okay, you know, we don't need democracy anymore. We don't need democratic governance anymore. We can just rely on the market and corporations as good actors. That is a really, really scary thing. And that's the new warning that we're trying to make in this new project.
So that leads to another one of the questions from those out there on the internet. Someone named Catherine, how do you see, or do you see, and I think you probably want to answer this one, Joel, benefit corporations as a remedy for some of the cruelties of capitalism?
You know, we really tossed and turned about how to get benefit corporations into the film. And like many other things, that were left on the cutting room floor. Our initial sort of 4-hour version of the film had, deep treatments of the labor movement, had a critique of benefit corporations, ideas about that. But ultimately, we were sort of required by the various funders and broadcasters, et cetera, to get this thing down to an hour and a half. And that was one of the things we lost. I do deal with it in the book. And the basic critique is that while I think benefit corporations come from a good intention on the part of many people, it's basically a dangerous privatization of regulation. Benefit corporations tend to be the whole system depends upon assessment by what are usually nonprofit, but nonetheless private organizations. Some of them are for-profit. B-Lab would be the leading example in the United States. And in exchange for being benefit corporations, companies tend to get relief from various kinds of regulation. And so when you look at the literature, the sort of critical literature on benefit corporations, which I would say my book adds to, the basic idea is that what's happening here is you're getting corporations buying themselves out of real regulation, real legal mandatory regulation, if basically they check a few boxes on a list saying that, they're committed to a multi-stakeholder approach and this, that, and the other thing, but there's absolutely no oversight. There are no inspectors, there are no commissions, there are no agencies that are watching what benefit corporations are doing as part of the benefit corporation scheme. So, while I think for a smaller company to get B Corp certification, it's certainly not a bad thing, and it may be a nice way to kind of crystallize that company's commitments to what it believes its values are. But typically, if that company isn't publicly traded, it doesn't need that certification to do that. It doesn't have fiduciary obligations to shareholders. If you're a small company that's not publicly traded, you can be as good as you want. You can give up profit for social and environmental values as much as you want. You don't need a certification to do that. And so that's the deal for those companies. For large publicly traded companies, well, none of them, with the exception of, I think, one company in Brazil, Netralia, none of them have become benefit corporations. And that's because they don't even want to give their shareholders any hint that it's possible that they might think that there are other things that are more important than their shareholders' money. And it's really interesting to see a lot of big companies are coming together and putting pressure on the B Corp system to water down its requirements. And B-Lab, for one, has actually said, if you're a big publicly traded company, we will water down our requirements for you. So the whole thing is moving in the direction of yet another scam, like fair trade certifications, and in many cases, organic certifications, all of these private certification regimes that purport to take the place from real, public, legal, enforced regulation. And so that's part of the problem. That's not part of the solution.
Another question that we got that goes in a different direction from Lisa, or Liza. Since white privilege and white supremacy are essential pieces of the corporate oppressive pie, is it imperative that Black leaders, Indigenous leaders, and leaders of color are at the forefront?
Absolutely. I think that it's quite an extraordinary moment in time, in the sense that with the Black Lives Matter uprising after the brutal death of George Floyd, and then this igniting of a movement that is arguably one of the largest, if not the largest, civil rights movement in world history. I think it really has, it's really just laid bare the racialized history of corporate capitalism in both colonization and slavery, and just the extraordinary injustices in society, and obviously the pandemic and who has been hardest hit by the pandemic, both health-wise and economically, has also shown the world, anyone who's paying just the least bit of attention, just how unjust the world is. And one of those divisions is obviously race. And so I think that, you know, that provides us with this opportunity, because it feels to me like people's eyes are being opened whose eyes were closed before. And that I have personally witnessed, this is simply anecdotal, which obviously has limited value, but you know, it seems to me that there's less defensiveness around confronting our racialized society. And so it feels to me there's more receptivity to addressing systemic inequality and systemic racism, and that without question, part of that whole movement requires that those in places of race privilege, and such as all of us here, you know, need to step back and need to listen and need to create space for leaders from BIPOC communities. So I think it's, you know, fingers crossed, and I think I have no doubt many people watching are fighting for exactly that. But it feels to me just like an opportunity, and I just hope that we move forward on this issue in a positive way. It's about time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I would only add that when you look at the history, the history of where capital comes from, including the capital that continues to circulate in today's economy, it was extracted literally from slave economies and from colonialism, from the destruction and dispossession of indigenous peoples and the theft of their lands, and the theft and destruction of African American people in terms of slavery, and other racialized peoples in slave systems around the world. So slavery and colonialism are very much sort of where the original pools of capital came from at the beginning of capitalism in the 18th and 19th centuries. And that capital then creates other capital. And so every dollar today that's circulating in the economy is tainted by that history, by having come from that destruction of other people, of racialized people, in order to create that capital. And it continues today. Colonial dispossession continues today, with, you know, large resource projects and extractive capitalism continuing to dispossess people, whether it's in the Amazon or whether it's in the province where I live and Jen lives and Kat lives of British Columbia. You know, it's happening constantly. It's happening everywhere. And while there may not be technical slavery, though there still is actually a lot of technical slavery in the world. But even where the slavery is not technical, you have racialized populations living and working in slave-like conditions, including in Amazon warehouses, where their lives are being destroyed, you know, literally in some cases during COVID, where they're being paid paltry wages, where they have no security, and where they can't get ahead, where they can't have any kind of hope. So it continues, and we can't separate out the issue of sort of corporate power, of capitalism, from both its roots and its current day sort of working through the oppression of racialized people, and that we try to get at that in the film and in the book, but it's absolutely central.
Okay, well, we're getting lots of questions coming in. Just aware that we have 15 minutes left, so I'm going to go through these and see if we can answer as many of them as possible. Let me just see. Maybe I'll put a couple together. There's two here. one from Trong Ngo. Do you think that the union movement can be revived to counter the power of corporations? If so, should it be mandated by law and funded accordingly? And the related question from Colin is, what are your thoughts on employee-owned for-profit corporations? Example, co-ops, co-ownerships, John Lewis stores in the UK, Mondragon, but operating within a market system with creative destruction. So 2 questions about alternatives still within the economy, the world of economy.
Mm-hmm. I'll address it, I'm sure, is from a very different perspective than Joel. Just briefly related to unions, again, in terms of the cutting room floor, we had a whole section around how, the corporate assault on unions and declining membership in unions, and really the travesty and tragedy of that. Unfortunately, that hit the cutting room floor. But what I would like to say in terms of reinvigorating the union movement, in addition to supporting it wholeheartedly, is 2 things. One, I do think we have to look closely and ask some pretty deep questions about this rift that can be observed between some unions and the environmentalist progressive agenda, because I feel that there's a rupture there at times where, of course, the unions are looking out for the interests of their workers, but if those workers are in the oil patch, then those interests are contrary to the creation of a livable future. And I'm not for a second suggesting we abandon those workers, but rather support them to transition to a more livable economy. So I think that's a really fundamental rupture that needs to be addressed as we try to bolster the power of unions again, because then I believe that we would find more common solidarity and intersectionality in within different issues and within the advancement of progressive causes. That's one thing. And then secondly, I think if you look at some of the biggest strikes, like some of the women's strikes internationally, they're not necessarily union driven. Some are, of course, but some aren't. And then, some of the biggest marches aren't necessarily most foundationally union driven, and they rather draw on membership from a different categorization, with regards to the women's strikes that have been so effective internationally. They're obviously drawing attention to sexual violence against women and exploitative labor of women. So I just think it's really interesting to consider how we might tap the power of those kinds of movements so that they can work in alignment with the labor union movement as we also try to grow membership in it again. So those are just 2 comments I had about those questions. Other than I have to say one thing, it's quite personal, is I just got into a housing co-op, and I didn't, and I'm moving in a couple of months, and I've been, just completely renting in Vancouver, putting most of my disposable income into rent, and living within the for-profit housing market. I didn't understand just how extraordinarily oppressive it is. I mean, I knew it was, but now that I've been liberated by it, I am just so buoyed, and I just feel so free, and I just know it's possible. Like, why? And I feel like I've won the lottery. I mean, I worked really hard, and it took a number of years to get into this housing co-op, but this is only because some people chose to organize this building. And why on earth are we so oppressed as a society by these for-profit models, and that we think that's our only option? And anyway, I just wanted to add that sort of personal anecdote about how I feel quite unfettered right now in terms of housing for the first time in decades. And anyway, I'm a big proponent, obviously, of sort of alternative ways to organize the economy, including co-ops.
Yeah, I think those two questions are really, really good ones, and also potentially the subject of whole conversations.
Yes.
So just want to throw out into this quickly in the last 10 minutes of this discussion that this is in fact exactly what we hope we can do with the limitations of COVID, but the opportunity is we could be working with literally any of you out there watching to organize screenings combined with webinars in order to go deeper into any of these issues. And that's something that we just want to put out there as food for thought, because we can't cover everything at all in this short time. But thank you for those questions for both of you who gave them to us. I'm just going to look through what else we have here. This is sort of on the other end of the scale, ties it a little more with B Corps from Sanjin. What do you think of social enterprises, social impact, social entrepreneurship as being an answer?
So I'll begin with that, and then I want to say a couple things. I'll try to link it all together. Social entrepreneurship, co-ownership and co-ops, labor unions. These are all ways to organize people together into a common sort of group, collective that is then seeking some kind of social good. And that's great. And so just in terms of social entrepreneurship, I think, again, like B Corps, there's a lot of positive energy behind it, and there are a lot of good outcomes coming from it. But we show an example in the film, and we talk about an example in the book, which is a social entrepreneurship company called Bridge Academies International, with the social mission to provide education to children in Africa, funded by Bill Gates, and we show all the problems with that. So I guess what I would say is that ultimately, if we are pursuing social good, we need to do it in democratic ways through public institutions. That is a primary goal. I do not agree with Bill Gates when he says that, those public institutions don't work anymore. We need private corporations basically to take on the task of creating a better society. And so on the one hand, when I look at sort of social entrepreneurship, I mean, the company that made this film can be seen as falling in that category. Kat Dodd's company can be seen, businesses that are primarily oriented towards some social purpose. It's not a bad thing in its own right, but as a total movement, as a new approach to delivering social good in the world through for-profit institutions, that is not the direction that we should be going. And there's a way in which there's a big push within the whole social entrepreneurship movement to be going in that direction. But democracy is a very, very messy enterprise. And when we talk about unions, when we talk about co-ops, for example. I mean, we talk about Mondragon. Mondragon is a co-op that operates according to capitalist principles. It operates on a for-profit basis. It exploits workers. I spent a month in the Basque Country not too long ago, and I did a close study of Mondragon. There are all kinds of criticisms of how it treats the workers in its grocery stores and in its factories. So there are real problems when you take a good idea like a workers' co-op or a social business, and you insert it into the broader networks of capitalist relations and the way that things get distorted and twisted. And it can be the same with unions too. The same thing can happen with unions. And, Jen is talking about some of the unions in the resource industry that, are strongly against environmental measures, or some of the police unions that are strongly against measures that would promote accountability, citizen accountability. So all of these institutions have their problems, and all of them have potential benefits. And I, for one, think the labor movement is absolutely crucial, and I would run the risk of maybe unions here or there not being so great, to have a much more broadly unionized working movement, because that's the only way within capitalism now that we can promote any semblance of democracy and protection in the workplace. Otherwise, it's just individual workers versus what is effectively a collective institution, the corporation, that only through legal alchemy gets to operate as a single person. So you pit the worker against millions of shareholders, basically. That worker needs to have some kind of collective presence. That worker in the public sector needs to have a union to help fight against privatization, for example. And many unions are taking leading approaches in terms of the environment movement. Many unions are taking leading approaches in transitioning their membership from resource jobs into other kinds of jobs. So I think workers need to be organized in a capitalist society. There's no question about it. I think workers' co-ops are good in a capitalist society. There's no question about it. But we can't see these things as panaceas. As long as we have a hyper-capitalist society where markets and corporations are sort of at the apex and they are controlling things and governments are basically kowtowing to them, things are not going to work. And these kinds of institutions are going to get corrupted. And we're going to have this problem that we document in this new film and book of corporations saying, hey, we're the good guys now. Let us lead. Democracy doesn't work anymore. See what happened on January 6th? See all the failing governments? It doesn't work anymore. The little thing they're not telling you is part of the reason it doesn't work anymore is because they've been campaigning over the last 40 years to make sure it doesn't. To make sure it doesn't regulate them, to make sure it doesn't tax them, to make sure that government and democracy is totally diminished. So, ultimately, social entrepreneurship, a strong labor movement, co-ops, all good things, but the ultimate solution has to be to re-enliven democracy itself, to deepen it, to socialize democracy itself, which is why in the end we choose that route in the film. Yes, civil society, crucial, protest, organizing, all of it crucial. Privatization, bad. We need a robust public sector, but ultimately we need to occupy the institutions of democratic government, which is what democracy is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the people in charge, not sort of elites that kowtow to corporate elites telling us all what to do. So it's a very difficult navigation where we should, where do we put our efforts and our energies? And I think there are lots of places to put them, but ultimately it has to be directed to invigorating democracy again, socializing it, and ensuring that we have strong public institutions that are there to serve public interests, not private institutions that see public interest as a means to the end of shareholders accumulating wealth. I mean, that's the only way forward in my view.
That leads also to a question from Phoebe, and I'll give a shout out also to Move to Amend, who is mentioned in this question, who are one of the grassroots groups in the US that we're hoping to be working with. But Phoebe asked, what are Canadians and other nations activists doing to change the laws that gave corporations power? In the US, Move to Amend's We the People Amendment has 75 co-sponsors in Congress. So they're busy doing exactly, I think, Joel, what you're referring to. It's like digging into that democratic apparatus.
Yeah, I think, Joel, probably you're better equipped to answer this question.
Well, I'll just try to answer it really quickly, unlike any of my other answers. And that is, there are really two things to do. You can sort of change the nature of the corporation, or you can change the nature of the public system that regulates corporations and contains their power. And I think we need to be doing both. But I think in terms of sort of generating large political movements that are going to move us forward most quickly, we probably need to focus on the latter of those two things, on reinvigorating our democratic institutions, making them work truly democratically. Because if we don't do that, we're not going to have institutions in place that are prepared to change the nature of the corporation in the way it needs to be changed. Because ultimately, the corporation is a product of our governing institutions. It's created by governments. And so unless we change the nature of those governments, in ways where they are incentivized and feel beholden to change the nature of the corporation, we're not going to get very far. And yes, there are 75 co-sponsors of We the People in the United States, but I think that's kind of it. I don't think it's going to go a lot past that. So, you know, I think we have to be working on both fronts at the same time, but we can't be sanguine about, well, if we just, you know, try to change the nature of the corporation, everything will be fine. It won't.
Okay, we're almost, well, we actually are officially out of time. If it's okay with you, Jen and Joel, I'll just look through these questions and do a little wrap up to make sure I haven't missed anything. Let me just see. I did miss a question that might be interesting from Carrie about the NAFTA agreement is the progenitor of the ISD's clause. One writer calls this the Trojan horse in the so-called free trade agreements. Do either of you want to take that on quickly, or is that more than we can talk about in the last gasp of this discussion?
You go ahead, Joel, if you want to.
It was another issue that ended up on the cutting room floor. Yes, you're absolutely right that NAFTA was the first major ISDS agreement. Now there are hundreds, if not thousands, some bilateral, some multilateral around the world, and ISDS is a real problem because what it does is it gives corporations direct international law rights to challenge what democratic governments are doing, and corporations make use of that fairly regularly.
So there's one question, and I'm sorry to all of those who ask questions, because there's actually a lot of questions and we can't get through all of them. But I think this one's important in the context that we're in. And again, apologies to Jen for not making it more clear that this was the World Social Forum. But this question ties these two things together too, from Anonymous. He or she or they are saying, I would love to have your perspective about the narrative that is now being shared by the World Economic Forum that is pretty similar of the one that has been developed within the World Social Forum. I think this is referring to just some of these sort of pan-global agendas to get us on track. This is a really important question. So I think it's worth asking and taking a little time if you're willing to dig into a bit.
Sure. Well, you know, I was really happy to find out I wasn't where I thought I was, and I was able to take off my combative hat and put on my solidarity hat. So it made a much more pleasant morning. But I think, you know, I think that there are these two narratives that are so similar within the World Economic Forum. Really just points to, well, you know, I think it really points to how much the elite and have gotten away with in terms of convincing the rest of us that, you know, what they're doing is in all of our interests as opposed to primarily in their interests. And so, you know, that they still have the audacity to speak the narratives they do, I find rather shocking. And I think it's just so important to call them out as much as we can. That's my combative approach this morning. You know, that the Oxfam report, I'm sure I don't have to tell members of this community, that came out that showed during the pandemic, the top 10 richest men's wealth grew by $500 billion. And the profits of that, just the profits, could actually pay for vaccinating the whole world, right? And that people that are in a position of having that much wealth aren't stepping up right now while we're facing these multi-dimensional crises, you know, to just, you know, just that they can't see or continue along and continue to purport the narratives that they are. I find it obviously so troubling, and I think that the more we call them out, the better. And of course, I can't emphasize that enough as we transition. Thank goodness we got rid of the neo-fascist in the White House, but he is being replaced by a deep neoliberal, and we need to challenge and continue to push progressive agendas as that transition occurs too. So I guess all I really have to say is just highlighting how dangerous it is when there is these two narratives that are so similar, and yet one is so blatantly self-interested and deceptive, and that everyone just needs to question and call out and do the work we need to do to make transparent some of the deepest injustices that are happening in the world that's leading to this moment in time, which is literally, as I see it, we're at the edge of the cliff, as I said before, and don't have too much time to turn things around. So I find it very dangerous, very dangerous.
I'll be very brief on this point. I agree with what Jen is saying, and I would just add that, I mean, one of the central points of this book and film is that the WEF has effectively stolen the agenda of the WSF and said that, if the agenda of the WSF is we have all of these issues and people working collectively from the grassroots need to solve them through democratic means that are aimed at promoting a just and a livable, sustainable, and decent world. So that's the WSF's agenda. The WEF's agenda is we agree with all of those issues, but instead of having people collectively and democratically solving them, we think corporations should be put in charge of solving them. That's the difference. So it's the difference between what might be described as an agenda of benevolent democracy versus an agenda of benevolent corporate dictatorship. And that's a huge, huge difference. And really what the book and film are about is that the Davos crowd and corporate capitalism more generally have stolen that agenda as part of a very deliberate play for power, as part of a way of saying, hey, we can do that better than democracy. So let us do it. Even though we're not democratic, let us rule the world because we'll do a better job.
Thank you. Thank you both. So I think we should wrap up. Just before we do, wanted to give a few shout outs to David Eng and Darcy Hamilton behind the scenes who've been putting the tech together, and to Kate and Jordan, our interns who've been pulling all these questions out of the chat. So thank you for doing that. And then also to Good Pitch Vancouver Virtual, who introduced us to Carminda Maclorin, who is one of the people who prodded us into getting it together to organize this event. So thank you to all of you, Anthony and Sue. I hope you're watching. The last question that we got from the chat, I will address because it's more logistical, and people are asking how can they see the film outside of Canada. So what I can tell you about this is it is streaming now in Canada. It is available in some film festivals around the world, including Sonoma coming up in the US. We'll be having our European premiere in March. But we are also now able to, on a case-by-case basis, depending on where you are in the world, offer you an event somewhat like this, where we can co-host and stream the film and organize a discussion. We need to obviously raise money to do this, and that can come from a few different ways. So our hope is that if you are at all interested in helping us bring a real grassroots launch of this film out into the world, that you get in touch. These screenings can happen now. I can't speak for every single place because it depends on our distribution arrangements where you are in the world, but I think I can speak for all of us to say it's our absolute goal and sincere hope that we can not only get this film seen by as many people as possible, but that through that it becomes a real discussion tool, even with the limitations we have with this virtual forum. So I think there's a lot of you out there watching, but at this moment I can't see you, but I thank you for being here with us. And I just want to say if there's anything either Joel or Jen want to say in wrapping, and to end off our broadcast.
Just thank you for having us. This has been great and really great questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really great questions. Pick up Joel's book if you want to have a deeper dive in the issues. It's an excellent read. And yeah, thank you so much.
Watch the film. Yes, and to that end, over 600 people have registered to watch the film during the World Social Forum, which is amazing. And 225 have already logged in and are doing so as we speak. So this is very exciting. So please spread the word till the next few hours. The portal will be available. And get in touch with us. And if you're looking for a one-stop shop to find all the ways you can reach out to us, and also where you can buy Joel's book, and his first book too, and links to the first film, all of that is available at thenewcorporation.movie. And on that note, I think we can say goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye. Have a great WFF 2021.
Yes.